The bill that's before us is very vague in many respects, and I have some concerns about the language that appears in the file copy that we're voting on. Just bear with me while I find the page. If you look at lines 168 through 172 of this bill, effectively what this is about is the I think openly political campaign finance players that have been very prominent across the country. People know about Act Blue being the predominantly Democrat website devoted to raising funds for Democratic political campaigns across the country. And then there's also a companion version called Win Red, which is more a Republican type site. The thing about these particular entities is that unlike just a typical payment collection service like you might be accustomed to when you make a payment for some type of product, these are actively engaged in politics themselves. As political candidates in Connecticut, we've got to raise money. And when we do raise money, we are charged with finding different ways to collect it. And of course, there are a bunch of laws that we've adopted in recent years to govern what's acceptable and what's not, what limits of money we can collect, how it's to be collected, and so forth. I think the cash limit, for example, for legislative candidates is $100, for example. But more and more in recent years, as the internet has become more predominant and people have become more and more comfortable with making payments online for all kinds of things, whether they're buying something on Amazon, online shopping, or even making a political contribution, doing it online is more and more the custom. And as political candidates, virtually all of us engage in some sort of mechanism to collect funds for our campaigns via an online mechanism. I don't want to do any advertising for any particular companies, but the one that is really predominant in the state of Connecticut is not really a political organization. They don't express any position on political issues. They do not cater to only Democrats or Republicans. They kind of are merely engaged in the service of collecting those political contributions for political campaigns on behalf of candidates in both parties. They take a small fee, and that's really the end of it. And I really wish I understood this issue a lot more thoroughly because it's somewhat complex. But these larger companies, Act Blue and Win Red, apparently they are active in other states, and they engage in a lot more activity than simply being the mechanism by which candidates collect their money. They actually are also engaged in politics themselves. I mean, you can tell right by their names. Act Blue is clearly, focused on helping blue candidates or Democrat candidates, while Win Red would be focused on Republicans. And the bill that's before us, I'm very, very wary of, because I believe that this bill is going to open the door to these particular companies coming into our state and undermining the campaign finance rules that we have established here in Connecticut. And I will tell you that I question a lot of the rules and requirements and regulations that we've established in the state, because I'm a free speech person. And I also believe that in many respects, the money that is donated to political campaigns is a form of speech. And I don't like to see it limited in a lot of ways. But you've got to have certain protections. I'll give you one example. This morning, we had a bill regarding foreign interference in political campaigns. That's something that I supported wholeheartedly. I believe it passed out of this chamber unanimously. It's something that the chairman and I have worked on together over the last several years, and we are very happy to see it succeed. So we agree that we shouldn't have foreign interference in political campaigns as a bare minimum of how we view the world. Now, we might not agree on everything that happens, but I do believe that folks that are involved in politics in Connecticut should agree to certain things. And one of those things ought to be the rules of the game when it comes down to how elections are run, something I've discussed many times in this chamber, and also how campaigns are actually financed. We should be operating under the same rules. One side should not have any distinct advantage over the other in their ability to raise money. And if they do, it should be a product of their own merit and their own ability to raise that money, not because we've set up a structure that allows one side to do better than the other. The bill that is before us, the language that I alluded to right out of the gate, I just want to read it. It's a very short paragraph, and you'll see what I mean about how vague it is. It says, with respect to an online platform that collects any contribution from a contributor and transmits such contribution to a committee, a voluntary payment made by such contributor to such online platform, which is in addition to such contribution, and B, used by such online platform to conduct its operations. So this basically is going to allow those companies that are engaged in this practice of collecting campaign contributions and forwarding them off to those campaigns and collecting their fee, they're going to also be able to ask people making that donation if they'd like to offer an additional amount. You know, in the committee testimony and the public hearing, there was some conversation about referring to this as a tip jar. Well, unlike a tip jar in a restaurant or something like that where you're actually helping a specific employee for their quality service, what you would be doing by adding a tip in this particular case is effectively funding the company that's doing the contribution collecting. Now, if that money was being used for the express purpose of offsetting the cost of the process so that less money could be taken from the candidate's contribution, that might be a good thing. But the fact of the matter is, because we are not talking about a company that performs a mere service of doing this collection, they are also actively engaged in the political process. Now you have a different story, because money that is donated through this format is now going to aid in the political aims of that company. And I believe that is circumspect because I believe it is effectively enabling a way for actors in politics to circumvent the rules, the guidelines of our campaign finance scheme that exists. And that's what concerns me. Can I just ask a few questions through you, Madam President?
Yes, please.
The first one is simply on line 172. Can the good chairman maybe fill me in on what might define the terms when it's referred to as used by such online platform to conduct its operations? Through you.
Thank you. Senator Fleck, sir.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, the term online platform refers to the mechanisms that can be used to collect campaign contributions or political contributions through a website or an app. So that's what the term online platform means, and its operations mean the functioning of that platform.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. So is it the opinion of the good chairman that operations is limited only to the functioning of that platform or to the functioning of the company that's collecting the money? Through you.
Senator Fleck, sir.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I think the language is what it is, which is that it refers to the online platform conducting its operations. So whatever it takes to operate that online platform.
Thank you. Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. So here you are hearing the rub firsthand, which is that there's a kind of discussion to be had about what it means to say conduct its operations. If that was limited very specifically to doing nothing more than operating as a functionary of collecting political contributions, forwarding them to candidate committees, and collecting their fee for doing so, that'd be one thing. But we're talking about companies that are engaged in far more than that limited process. These companies not only collect fees in this particular method, they also collect information. They have information that they can sell. They have information that they can use as a mechanism to help aid other political candidates. And when we're talking about these two individual companies that I recognized in my comments earlier, we're talking about companies that are, in effect, partisan. So their aim is going to be able to use additional resources to be able to engage in advancing the political agenda of those respective political parties. And I just don't think that that's an appropriate use of these platforms. We have developed over time a very, very, I think, well run, well managed, well-defined is maybe the word I'm looking for, system that we have to determine what political campaigns are eligible, how they are to collect money, what particular contributions are in fact acceptable. And the fact of the matter is that I think this will undermine that, because we are not simply talking about, a tip jar. We're talking about the ability to collect additional money, which is going to be used to advance a political agenda without being vetted through the campaign finance laws of our state. Is there anything, through you, Mr. Chairman, is there anything in this definition of conducts its operations that would exclude any particular use of funds for the online platform? Through you.
Thank you, Senator Sampson. Senator Flexer.
Thank you, Mr. President. Nice to see you up there this evening.
Good to see you.
So I appreciate the good senator's question, and I want to answer by saying that, broadly, our state has incredibly strong campaign finance laws, particularly when it comes to our public financing program, but also across the board for our campaign finance laws in general, in all circumstances, not just for the Citizens Election Program. And so talking about the contributions that would be made using these online platforms moving forward, I think it's important to note that the State Elections Enforcement Commission, whose testimony we took very seriously, and as folks who follow these issues closely may know, this is an issue that has been debated to some degree in the legislature for several years, and we've come to this proposal that's before us today after a lot of detailed consultation and an effort to ensure that we're not doing anything that undermines those strong campaign finance laws that we have here in Connecticut. And I would refer my colleagues here in the Senate to look at the testimony from the State Elections Enforcement Commission and their statement that this section of the bill that we're debating right now would not pose a serious problem for our campaign finance scheme. And so I think it's really important to recognize that the existing limitations in terms of what political spending is allowed are still in place, and they will still be in place even if people are able to use a wider variety of online platforms to take campaign contributions. And so just to give further detail for the good senator and his questions overall, I think it's really important to point out that just because a platform is able to take in additional resources using this extra step of this additional contribution, they won't then be able to use those resources here in any political manner in Connecticut, that our existing laws and regulations would prevent that kind of spending from happening. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I appreciate that answer, and I appreciate the comments made by the good chairman. I mean, they are very reassuring, except for the fact that I just don't see that it's going to play out the way she's describing. I mean, the fact of the matter is that if these companies wish to make more money, they could charge a larger fee for the transaction. And there's nothing stopping them from doing that. But I asked myself, why would we as a state legislature enable one of these companies if their only service that they are providing to a political campaign is to be the processor of political contributions? Why would we allow them to put their hand out also looking for funds for themselves simultaneously? I mean, what would be the benefit to the campaigns? What would be the benefit to the donors? What would be the benefit to our system to allow that to happen? And why would we allow it in a simultaneous function with the actual contribution? I mean, I think that it would be okay for any one of these companies to go ahead and set up a parallel website and say, if you want to donate to my donation contribution company or my online platform, then you can do so. But we're making this part of the transaction by allowing the tip jar to come up in the process of someone making this contribution. And I just don't see that that's related to the campaign, and I don't see that there's a genuine benefit, and it makes me wonder, why we're going to allow that to occur. It strikes me that the concerns that were laid out by the SEC in their original testimony still exist. Now, there's some conversation, and again, I don't even know this full well because I didn't have enough conversation with all of the parties represented. Again, I didn't know we were going to be debating and voting on this bill right at this minute. I thought we were still in the midst of talking about it and trying to come up with a compromise. But the fact of the matter is, I have been somewhat assured that the SEC now feels that the bill's current language is okay, but I don't see it that way. I see that the concerns that they laid out in their testimony still exist, and for the same reasons, which is that you now have companies that are actively engaged in political campaigning. That's what they do. Their mere existence is for the purpose. And again, look, I love politics. Mr. Chairman, I think it's great. I want to see as many people involved in the debate about the future course of our local, state, and federal government as possible. So I have no objection to the actors involved. In fact, I'm a guy who says that we should have almost no limitations on the way we run political campaigns. That may not even be popular with my own constituents because, people, I think, often believe that there's, corruption in political campaigns. My concern is more about corruption at the state level or the federal level via government. Because once you empower the government to decide the parameters of how political campaigns operate as far as how they are funded, how campaigns raise money, what speech they can employ, and I know this very well personally because I've been engaged in a debate over how political expenditures can work, and based on the fact that the state now has a say in determining what speech you can actually use in a political campaign. So to me, that's always been the danger. It's not so much the campaigns or the individual citizens that are going to be up to no good. It's the fact that if you empower the state to start to dictate the rules of how campaigns operate, they can benefit some campaigns, candidates, and issues over others by virtue of their regulatory scheme. And to me, that's a larger danger and one that actually can only stifle freedom. In my view, we should have the maximum amount of freedom when it comes to how political campaigns are run, how money is raised, and so forth. And really, it ought to be based on merit. That's a fundamental core American principle, and I believe that the best candidate should win. And that's the candidate who makes the best arguments, who can, by virtue of the strong case they make, they can raise the most money to make their most effective case for political victory. And but we don't live in that world. We live in a world where we actually have a very, very structured system. The maximum donation that you can make for a political candidate running for a certain office is X, and you can only make that the contribution under certain circumstances and accompanied by a specific form. That campaign it can only accept from certain contributors at certain times. I mean, we have a lot of rules built into the system. People have to meet certain criteria. We do not allow contributions from corporations. We don't allow contributions from foreign nationals. We don't allow contributions from people that engage in political activity or contracting with the state of Connecticut. I mean, there are rules galore. And again, I have questioned some of those rules over time as being too strict or limiting the freedom of different people to engage in the political process. But here I am on the other side today because I believe this bill that is before us is undermining that entire structure. And I'm kind of at a loss that my colleagues seem to think that this is a small thing. This is not a small thing. This is something that may change the landscape of political campaigns in our state going forward permanently. Because what we're doing here is we are enabling folks that are engaged in political advocacy to circumvent the basic premise of how our campaign finance structure works. Because we've written this very vague language into this bill about conducting its operations. Now, if we get down into the nitty-gritty and I start to ask a lot of questions about, well, how can they spend this money and where can they spend this money, I'm quite certain there are probably legitimate answers to those questions. But the problem with those answers is that they negate the reality that if I collect money in my one hand, I can use it for a lot of different purposes. So if I was going to use money in my right hand to pay my mortgage, and somebody says, well, I'm going to give you this money, but you can't use it on politics, I'm going to go, okay, I will just take the money you're giving me and I'll pay my mortgage with it because that's an acceptable purpose. And the money I was going to use to pay my mortgage, I'll spend that on politics. I know that's a really bad off-the-cuff analogy, but that's what I'm afraid of here. Is that we're creating a mechanism for these companies to collect funds, and then through the fact that they can safely say they're not using the exact same money for a purpose, they're offsetting their other expenses in a way that allows them to use other money for those purposes. And that, to me, is dangerous. In an effort to try and streamline this policy, Mr. President, and try and come up with something that I think is actually reasonable, I drafted an amendment. And I just want to talk about it for a minute first, and then I'll have the clerk call the actual amendment. But what we were talking about here is originally presented to me as a way for contributors to political campaigns to be able to effectively offset the amount that the candidate is charged from the contribution. You donate $100, the company charges a 2 or 3% fee, say 3%. That means they're getting $3 out of that. So the candidate committee only ends up with $97. So it would be reasonable, in my mind, to allow the person to be able to say, well, I'll donate an additional $3 to offset that, so that the campaign is actually getting the full $100 that was offered. And I like this concept because of a couple different things. First and foremost, right now, depending on which service you use, you may end up be paying more or less as a campaign for this service of having your fees collected by a credit card through these companies. And this would even that out, because I think in a lot of cases you would see the donors, willing to check that box for that fee. The other thing that I think it does is that some candidates and some campaigns are going to collect their money via cash and personal check, where there is no deduction, where they will end up being able to collect the full amount that will go into their campaign finances, to run their future campaign with. And other candidates are going to be using services that actually collect these fees. there's no reason in my mind where the candidate should actually suffer in the amount of funds that they actually receive, if possible. And it allows them to collect an equal amount, whether or not the person paid by cash or by credit card. All good things in my mind. And as a result of this philosophy, I've come up with this amendment, which I think achieves the stated goal that was presented to me when this bill first came to me, and I don't think is actually the goal of the proponents of the legislation. I think that the goal of the legislation is actually far more nefarious than that. I think it's really about promoting a specific online platform and enabling them to operate in this state so that they can use their network of campaigns, candidates, and involved political advocates around the country to advance a political agenda, which I don't object to, by the way. I think that part is totally fine. The problem I have is that there should not be a mechanism to fund it that escapes our political campaign finance scheme. So, Mr. President, I have an amendment. It's LCO 5153. If you're be so kind, I'd ask the clerk to call that amendment, and I'd be given leave of the chamber to summarize.
Mr. Clerk.
LCL number 5153, Senate Amendment A.
Senator Sampson, you may proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. President, rather. You're Mr. Chairman sometimes, too, so I get confused. But today you're Mr. President, and I thank you very much for having the clerk call that amendment. I just described pretty much what this does. I encourage my colleagues to support this amendment because I believe that this is the most fair way to approach the proposal before us. It doesn't leave any vague language, as the underlying bill does, that would allow for money to be used for political advocacy outside of our campaign finance structure, and instead set up a simple mechanism by which donors to political campaigns can pay the small charge for the processing and thereby allow the candidate to receive the full amount. I move for adoption of this amendment, Mr. President, and I ask for a roll call vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sampson. When the vote is taken, it will be taken by roll. Would you care to remark further? Senator Flexer.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I appreciate the good conversation that the good ranking member and I have had on this proposal today and over many weeks, but I would encourage my colleagues to reject the amendment that's before us right now. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Flexer. Would you care to remark further? Would you care to remark further? Would you care to remark further? If not, the machine will be open. And Mr. Clerk, would you announce the pendency of a roll call vote?
Immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. An immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. Voting on Senate Amendment A. Total number voted 36, total voting yea 12, total voting nay 24, absent not voting 0.
The amendment fails. Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much for the recognition, Mr. President. As typically happens, my amendment went down on a party line vote. Very unfortunately, because I think I did a good job of explaining the potential danger of the bill that is before us. I think it is potentially got the ability to undermine the structure of our campaign finance laws that have been laid out meticulously, through year after year of debate, public comment, and experience that have brought us to the point where we are today, where I think we have one of the finest campaign finance structures in the entire country. And this particular legislation, I think, serves as a signal that politics ultimately is more important than having a legitimate and quality, fair campaign finance structure. And I find that very disappointing. So with that, Madam President, I will be a no vote today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Clerk, give us the tally, please.
Senate Bill 387, total number voting 36, total voting yea 24, total voting nay 12, absent not voting 0.
Legislation passes.